szevasztatom,
Tehát, hogy ne legyen körülöttem semmi. Itt viszont ne itt voltál, és láttad, ahogy gyakorlatilag. Tudod, még egy ilyen
coming.
But here we are, first port. Who invaded?
Tehát a madarak ellen van. Madarak ellen van szerintem. De kaptanak.
Yeah, that's why it's like the perfect movie. The part
So cold. I now realise she was crying for that. She really did do it.
Here's a picture from 1902 to show you some changes that have happened over the years. First thing to note, that is not a suicide protocol. That had a platform. Guards could walk in there and use that as a relaxation area during their shift. Where you see these two trees here, that used to be the blacksmith shop for the horses and mules on the island. You're surprised, we have no horses and mules today. This white building in the corner isn't here anymore. That was a toilet. It was a walkway to the ocean covered for your privacy. Just drop straight to the water. That was considered okay back then, as was fishing off the dock. I always tell people, if you're invited to a seafood dinner during the Army era, say no.
Oh yeah.
This is the 1986 Chevrolet, and it runs great today.
It's a nation.
We've got 18 movies filmed on the island. You've heard of some of them. Escape from Alcatraz, The Rock, The Enforcer. This was a movie called Murder in the First, starring Kevin Bacon. Because what movie doesn't have Kevin Bacon in it? During the filming of the movie, they brought this truck out by barge, and then they filmed it going up and down the island, all over the island. At the end of filming, they told the National Park Service, hey, you can have the truck. I'm waiting for someone to give me a truck like that. I'm doing one so far. This truck has a very boring life today. We drive it down to the dock, we wash it, we drive it back up here, and we park it. But the best part of the story, at the end of filming the movie, they edited out all the scenes of the truck. So we got a truck, they got nothing. Well, here comes a different truck. Let's let him through because he's a big boy. Not the driver of the truck. Thank you, guys. As part of the fort design, we had two windows on the side. This cannon is facing this way. We put a replica cannon on the left so you can imagine what it was like. And as you go through the first arch, look up and see the date of the building and the obsolete spelling of the island name. This is the oldest building still standing on the island. The name Alcatraz Island, inside, that's the Spanish word for seabird or gannet. When the Spanish settled here, they named all the islands. When the Americans came in, they changed some of the names, or they misunderstood some of the names. Like I said, Alcatraz means gannets. They thought it meant pelican. There are a lot of pelicans that fly by the island. Can you guys go this way? Or is she going? Yeah. Come on this way. You need to go through that tunnel first. The Spanish word for pelican is pelicano. A little different. But the Americans didn't care. They didn't speak Spanish. So this got the name Alcatraz. There are no pelicans on the island. You will see pelicans fly by, but they do not nest on the island. High school education in Spanish, that's all they needed. First thing built on the island as a prison was right where we're standing. This was a big wooden structure called Lower Prison. They had another one up the hill, slightly smaller. If this was Lower Prison, what was that one? Upper, exactly. You can tell the people who had good coffee. Yeah, the Army treated prisoners differently than a federal prison would. In the Army, they kicked you out of your cell in the morning and gave you a job assignment. And you had to go do whatever they told you to do. Let's see, you're going to march today. You and 63 of your friends are going to march up and down the hill all day long, 8 hours. We have a big rock with your name on it. We need you to make little rocks on it. There's a schoolhouse on the island. It's about time you learn some bookkeeping skills. So you're going to go to the schoolhouse all day. The rest of you, we've got construction on the north end of the island. The Army was always building and destroying buildings. So you're going to go up there. We'll give you hammers and you can pound away for a while. At the end of the day, they counted all the prisoners and locked them in these very small, very stuffy cells. These were really, really no fun at all. The best description I've heard was they smelled like men. By the way, this is the pipe for the coal fire that kept the wooden building warm at night. You got that? Wooden building, we're going to lock you in and then start a fire to keep you warm. Soldiers didn't like that for some reason. They wanted a concrete fireproof cell house. The Army was very much, you'll be fine, until in 1905, they actually had a minor fire. A sentry put it out before anything big could happen. But the Army suddenly realized they needed to build a concrete cell house. They had one little problem before they could begin. There's the lighthouse from 1854, and you can see the building they're going to build next to it. What's wrong with that lighthouse?
Too short.
Way too short. First thing they had to build, starting in 1909, is the 85-foot tall lighthouse that you see as you're coming in on the boat. That lighthouse is still in use today. The Coast Guard comes out and checks it regularly. Once they had that built, they tore everything off the top of the island and built the concrete cell house that we're walking to. Guess who built the prison?
Prisoners.
Army prisoners. The Army said, you guys have been waiting to learn how to build a jail. Let me show you how. They taught them and supervised them. No extra tunnels. They built the prison and moved in the next day. Basically, you did a good job, sir. Here's your cell. They did that for everyone. This was an Army prison until 1934. In 1934, the Army moved out and the Federal Bureau of Prisons took over. They made this the first supermax prison. This is where they sent the most dangerous, the most disruptive, or the most infamous prisoners in the federal prison system. Infamous prisoners like Al Capone. Even today, people know the name Al Capone. In the 1930s, he was more famous than the president. I've seen newspaper clippings from the Chicago Tribune which say, Al Capone went to a baseball game today. That'd be like somebody saying Taylor Swift went to a football game today. He was that famous. There were a lot of famous gangsters that were sent here, but nobody remembers gangsters of the 1930s. Well, maybe you do, I don't. Yeah, there were a bunch of people like Bonley Davis, Doc Barker, Machine Gun Kelly, not the singer. Machine Gun Kelly was a kidnapper and bank robber. He got his nickname because he could write his name on a board using a machine gun. He had a poor choice of targets. He tried to kidnap the president's friend. They gave him a free ride to Alcatraz. When he got here, the warden said, "That's the nicest kidnapper I've ever met." That is not great praise. He liked to brag about the crimes he'd committed, and the other prisoners on the recreation yard would go, "Wait a minute, I was in on that job. You weren't there, dude." They started calling him Pop Gun Kelly. There's an escapee right there. This was an federal prison for only 29 years, from 1934 to 1963. One very easy reason for that: it's crazy expensive to have a desert island as a prison. There's no water on the island. The Army tried to find water. They drilled down 200 feet. With no water, they had to bring all the water by boat. If you have to bring water, what are you going to do to keep the prisoners occupied? They said, "Let's start a laundry." Laundries need even more water. They had a barge that brought 130,000 gallons 3 times a week to fill the water tower and 25 cisterns on the island. We had to bring everything else by boat as well, of course. Food, clothing, bricks, bullets, desks, anything you needed had to come by boat. This place was 3 times more expensive than any other prison in the US. Now, by the early 60s, the buildings were starting to fall apart because of the salt air. They looked at how much it would cost to repair everything here, and they said about $6 million. Someone said we could build a new prison in the middle of the country for $5 million, and we wouldn't have the supply problems that we have here. What do we have coming up the road now? Oh, the forklift. Let's let Mr. Ouchie have his way, whichever direction he's going. I think he's going up the hill. That tells you what I know. So they built a new prison in Marion, Illinois, moved all the prisoners there, and shut this place in 1963. For the next 6 years, we just had a caretaker on the island. Fun fact, he still had the newspaper delivered every day. He was friends with the KGO radio traffic helicopter pilot. The helicopter pilot would fly over and drop a newspaper on his way to doing traffic reports. That's called friends in high places. In 1969, 6 years after the island closed, a group of Native Americans, calling themselves the Indians of all tribes, occupied the island for 19 months. They were trying to claim the island under the Treaty of Fort Laramie, which basically said unused federal property can revert to the tribes. The government said, no, we were going to use that. Great, guys. So we had a 19-month standoff. During that time, we had 300 Native Americans living on the island. They had all the same supply problems everybody else did. They had to bring water and food over from the mainland. During that same period of time, we had a couple thousand people who would come over here on private boats because there were no police here. They'd come over to consume illegal substances or cause vandalism. Hey, vandalism. One night in 1970, we had 4 fires on the same night. This used to be the social hall where the guards and their families would relax after work. Top of the island, there was a warden's mansion. It looks like this now. The lighthouse used to be surrounded by a 2-story, 2-family lighthouse keeper's house. That's been completely torn down. All you see is the lighthouse. And there was a medical office up there. That's where the men's and women's bathrooms are today. When these fires happened, the government blamed the occupiers. The occupiers said, really? We were living here. Why would we do that? They blamed people coming from the mainland. There were no police on the island, nobody to investigate. So all we can say today is 4 fires of suspicious origin. Now, during the prison era, this building was in great shape. This is where the guards and the guards' families would relax after work. It had a big soda fountain like you'd see in a department store. It had ping pong tables and pool tables. The bottom floor was a dance floor. They held dances Saturday night. They had a 2-lane bowling alley. This was quite the spot. Prisoners never saw this. This was only for the guards and the guards' families. And I keep mentioning families because we had children on the island. There were about 50 kids on the island. Kids would go to school in San Francisco. They'd walk down to the dock. There was a ferry that ran 12 times a day between here and San Francisco. When you get to San Francisco, it's a 2-block walk to elementary, middle, or high school. Coming back in the afternoon, you had to have a wooden dog tag on your wrist because every kid in San Francisco wanted to sneak onto the Forbidden Island. The kids who grew up here have written about it. We have books in the bookstore about it. They said it was a very cool place to grow up. It was a small town. Everybody knew each other. As a child, you couldn't get away with much because everybody acted like they were your parents. Nobody locked their doors at night because everybody knew where the bad people were. This was an all-male prison with all-male guards. The only women on the island were wives and daughters. Women who committed similar crimes were sent to a prison in Texas. What that meant for the prisoners here is they never saw women. If they saw a glimpse of a woman in a window, that was a week's conversation. The longest-serving prisoner on the island was a guy named Alvin Creepy Karpus. Creepy was a librarian assistant pushing books through the cell house. He came upon the visitation row where one of his friends was visiting with the friend's wife. He looked through the window at his friend's wife and said, "That's the first woman I've seen in 19 years. So a very lonely time. Okay, now we are going up to the cell house where you're going to pick up the audio guide. It's available in 11 languages. I hope you speak English because you've been staring at me for a while. If you have any questions, ask me, I'll make up answers. Okay? Let's go up.
This wood building on your left was a salvage shop for the military. Penitentiary made it into an electric shop, repaired motors, vacuum tubes, radios, things like that. This is a good example of the difference between an army prison and a federal prison. If you came here during the army era, you were a soldier, and they sent you here to get reformed so you could go back to your original unit. So to help with that, they had a schoolhouse and a library full of instructional books. One of your job assignments for the day would be go to school. They taught practical things like bookkeeping. Some small number of prisoners did not know how to read and write. They learned on the island. About 70% of the Army soldiers went back to their original unit. That's considered a very good number for a prison. When this became a federal prison, all that reform went away. You were sent here because you misbehaved in another federal prison. The classic phrase was, break the rules, go to prison. Break the rules in prison, go to Alcatraz. They wanted to control you, not reform you. So in general, prisoners weren't allowed on this side of the island. We didn't need a schoolhouse. We closed it and made it living quarters for bachelor guards. We had a library in the cell house. They closed this library and made it a shooting range where the guards could practice shooting their rifles and pistols. That's reform versus control. Up here you can see the lighthouse from 1909, still in use today. Coast Guard comes out and checks it regularly. That ruined building in the corner used to be the warden's mansion. That was a 22-room mansion occupied by the warden and his wife. We had 4 different wardens over the 29 years. Each one was married, each
one had adult children. The adult children did not live on the island. They lived in other parts of the U.S. This building in front of us is actually the top 3 floors of the building you saw at the dock with the native writing on it. These top 3 floors were added as guards' apartments in 1900. There also used to be 3 large apartment buildings on the flat parade ground. However, after the native occupation ended in 1971, the government made this a national park. They came out and tore those buildings down. They didn't want anyone living on the island. We have no one living on the island today. We have 24-hour security instead. During the prison era, guards wanted to live here for 2 reasons. It was cheap, and the prisoners could do laundry. There's actually a children's book, Al Capone Does My Shirt, based on the fact that Al Capone worked in the prison laundry. Surprisingly, single guards do not want to live on a desert island with a cell house. Apparently, that's not a rich dating area. Single guards would live in San Francisco and they would commute over by ferry to do their shift. But it was a lot more expensive to live in the city than it was to live here. If you lived on the island, you paid about $35 a month for free laundry. If you lived in San Francisco, you might pay up to $100 a month. Can you imagine paying $100 a month? That's crazy talk. This large tree on your right is a eucalyptus tree. Those come from Australia. That one came here as something this big in 1924.
Yeah, one right in front. One's we've got in the yard and out the front. Making koalas in those here like we do. The big ones, Italy's going to cut them down. Yeah. I wonder if you're allowed to.
When you're going to fill this prison with the most dangerous people in America, one thing you do not want is for anyone to escape on the way here. Back in the 1930s, everybody traveled by train. So Bureau of Prisons built special train cars. They had steel bars on the windows. They had a gun cage at each end of the car where a guard could stand and be safe with a pistol. They had locks on all the seats. They could lock the prisoners down so they couldn't get up and cause mischief. They didn't want prisoners to know when they were coming here. Many of these prisoners were part of big criminal gangs. It was trivial to get information out of a prison. If the gang found out their friends were coming across country, they would have tried to stop the train and break them out. So in great secrecy one day, the Bureau of Prisons backed 3 rail cars into Atlanta Federal Prison. They woke up 53 prisoners, including Al Capone, marched them onto the train, locked them to the seats, and started the train across country. No chance to say goodbye. They didn't even tell them where they were going until they were already on their way. Now, of course, the press isn't dumb. The press knew that Alcatraz was going to be filled, so they were looking for unusual train cars. Here they come. Steel bars on the windows. They don't stop at any normal train yard. When they do stop, there's 100 guards around the train. The press said they're coming to Alcatraz, and the press was all over in Oakland, the main rail yard, waiting for the train to arrive. The Bureau of Prisons didn't want that. Instead, they took the train around the North Bay to a little town called Tiburon, where there was a dock with a rail. They pushed the rail cars onto a barge, and then push the barge across the bay to get it here. Don't be nervous, you're in a flat boat in a metal tube, locked in. When you get over the rough part of the bay, you'll probably be fine. They actually made it fine. When they got here, they unlocked the seats and marched the prisoners off. That was the first time any of those prisoners touched ground since Atlanta. Atlanta's on the other end of the country, in case you're interested.
Yes.
4-day trip. I'm sure that train car smelled great. They marched the prisoners up this same road to the same shower where we are going. They did not get an audio tour. They got a shower, clothing, and a new cell. And the warden sent a telegram to Washington, D.C. that said, 53 packages of furniture arrived, no damage. Trying to keep it quiet. They did the same trick with McNeil Island Prison in Washington State and Leavenworth Prison in Kansas. When this place was full, we averaged about 275 prisoners. Not that many in the global scheme of things, but these were the most dangerous and disruptive prisoners. These were the guys who were really good at starting riots. These were the guys who tried to kill guards. If we had escape attempts and the guy would just keep trying, they'd come here to calm down. We had one prisoner who was sent here for 16 escape attempts. So, to control the dangerous guys here, we had a high number of guards. We had one guard for every 3 prisoners. I talked to a modern correctional officer. She says in her secure facility, it's 1 guard for 250 prisoners. Of course, we have electronics today. They did not have it back then. But 1 to 3 was still an extraordinarily high number. It did not stop the escape attempts. We had 14 escape attempts in 29 years. The 14 escape attempts involved 36 men. 23 were recaptured. 6 were shot and killed. 2 drowned, and 5 are listed as missing and presumed drowned. That includes 2 men who in 1937 broke out of a building on the far north end of the island called the Model Industries Building. In heavy fog, they broke windows, bars, and a fence, got down to the water, and were almost immediately sucked under. Now, because of the fog, the guards didn't see what happened. Only other prisoners saw. And guess what? Prisoners do not talk to guards. Snitches get stitches. So the guards had to keep searching for these men for years and years, even though the prisoners knew they drowned in the first 5 minutes. The other 3 unaccounted for are the basis for the movie Escape from Alcatraz, starring Clint Eastwood. You'll see their actual cells in the cell house as part of the audio tour. In 1962, a year before the prison closed, 4 prisoners figured out how to carve out the back of their cell and get into a utility corridor. They hid what they were doing using heavy cardboard and paint. In the utility corridor, there were pipes and boards to let them go above the 3rd floor, where they found a flat place to build things. First thing they built was fake heads for their cells. They would steal a sheet and some tape and build a head-shaped object. One fellow worked in the barbershop, so they had all the hair they needed to build a wig for the head. Another fellow had a paint set. He painted the heads Caucasian flesh color. They would store these heads above the 3rd floor, and at night bring them into their 1st floor cell, put the head in the bed along with a couple of blankets to look like a body. The guards walking by in the dark never suspected anything. It just looked like a sleeping prisoner. Once they had the heads built, they built a raft out of stolen raincoats. Back then, raincoats were rubberized cotton. They would take a raincoat, carve it into a big rectangle, sew it into a tube, glue the seam, hold the glued seam up to an uninsulated steam pipe to melt the glue and make the tube airtight. They built homemade panels out of scrap lumber and any fasteners they could steal. Guess what? They were good at stealing. One fellow ordered a concertina. That's a small handheld accordion. If you take the reeds out, you've got a perfect bellows for inflating a raft. The night they escaped, they left their heads in the cells. I love that line. They've been working on an air vent cover on the south end of the roof.
They went down their first floor. Wow.
Lo digo para que te salga piscina con la
aperto.
I know, who would you call? Would you call Zara? Or no, Zara Juice?
Ik kon niet terug, hè? Ça s'habille bien.
Student level